I'm interested in like how your job has been affected by being in lockdown, because so much of what you normally do with students is face to face and it's on campus. So what are you actually up to right now? What does your job look like as students' representatives?
So many Teams calls, I can't even tell you. Basically, my whole life is just turned into Teams calls. But obviously, we're doing a lot more social media. We've done quite a lot of live streams now as well. Had some more like kind of open sessions for students to either comment or get in contact with us that way, as well as all of the kind of usual stuff moving online. So yeah, it's been a lot of that. Obviously, a lot of different casework and issues coming up. A lot of university meetings as well. We're one of the unions that is quite involved in the university when it comes to decision making. So we've been quite fortunate to be included in a lot of that, but it has meant a lot of long hours debating different policies and last minute changes. So that's basically been my life for the past month now.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I think I had 7 Zoom meetings in a row yesterday. At one point I was getting disorientated about which one I was actually in anymore.
Yeah, especially because you can be left in a lobby and all these different things on Teams. So
yeah, I've got different parliamentary committees, and we've got so we use a system called Blue Jeans for when we're having the formal meetings, because it's basically like Zoom or Skype, but you need that one to broadcast on. Parliament needs it to broadcast onto TV, but at the same time we're using Microsoft Teams. I've got different committees having a discussion in Teams while we're doing another committee's meeting in Blue Jeans. Now, I've almost asked like health experts about what do they think of the SQA's exam systems this year, because I'm totally confused about what we're talking about anymore. But Dan, Amy brought up an interesting point there about being one of the student associations that's more involved with their uni, because some universities really embrace students elected representatives and others try and keep them as far away as possible. What's your experience at UWS been like? Are you really involved at the moment in how the uni is deciding what its response is?
I think we're slightly different to what Amy is. Obviously, it's a different setup of university, and we're kind of multi-campus, so there is massive differences between the two. At the start of the pandemic, we met with the university every day and kind of gave our piece. Met one of the vice principals, kind of said what we wanted and what we wanted to see. We've not been involved in the kind of higher up end of stuff, but that's not particularly abnormal. We normally have a kind of appointed rep that we speak to and try and channel our views that way. Obviously, we have members of the University Court and University Senate, and we can get our voice heard in there. But as for kind of debating the policy and stuff, it's amongst ourselves, and then trying to pass that on to our kind of key contact within the university. So probably not been quite as busy on the dealing with the university front as Stirling has, but because our campus is a very kind of walk around, and you see people, all my casework tends to come from chatting to someone when they're at the bar, or passing them in a corridor, or them finding me sitting in my office and asking me a question, whereas now a lot of it's kind of getting a big message on Facebook of someone in a panic because they can't just stop and say, is this right? And they're having to get to the point, and a lot of things are building up, and so it's a bit more stressful dealing with the actual casework, because it tends to come in a lot more serious than I normally would have picked it up, and it's coming in probably 3 or 4 times more now than it has before.
What is the kind of casework that you're getting? Like I was getting a lot of stuff from students right at the start about issues like housing and student accommodation, and now it's shifting a little bit more to like long-term financial support, loss of employment, that kind of things. Like what kind of casework are you getting?
I think it went from, I was the same at the start, it was housing, and about a week or so after that, we started getting a lot more kind of what's going to happen with my exams. Am I going to be back in September? I need certain software, and it kind of stretched out into different things, like much more wide. And now it's getting to finance. When, like, are we getting SAS over the summer? Is the Scottish Government going to follow through with their comments about UBI? Where are we going with that? I think UWS and Abertay are slightly different because our SAS ends a month earlier than everyone. So that, like, the SAS payment that comes in next week is the last one for UWS. So I think there's a little bit extra kind of worry from our students on that.
Amy, what about you? Is that kind of broadly the same?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a lot of it was just to do with assessments and exams at the beginning, a lot of that, and as well because our university announced quite early on that first and second year exams were cancelled, it kind of went from there, and there was a lot of conversation around that, especially because we run quite a lot of professional, like accredited courses, so there was a lot of discussion there with different, like the Law Society and different external bodies there, so there's a lot of that at the beginning, but yeah, obviously a lot of issues with housing as well. Because we're all on campus, a lot of our students obviously live just on campus, so it's quite a difficult and unique situation there. But yeah, and then now it's far more to do with finances, what support people can get through the summer. Obviously, they've ended up either staying on campus a lot longer than they expected to, or being away from campus a lot longer than they expected to. So yeah, either way, there's a lot going on there. And then also looking at next semester and what kind of things are going to be available, because at the moment, Stirling has moved the postgraduate start date a month ahead into October, so kind of looking at what effect that's going to have on our postgrad students as well.
Yeah, the housing one at the start was really interesting because the issue that I was getting was basically students were obviously having to leave their student accommodation or private rented flats and things they were in and go back home because universities were closing, the lockdown was clearly coming at that point. But folk were still being told by whoever the accommodation provider, the landlord was, they were going to have to keep paying rent. So you had student accommodation on empty campuses and they were still trying to charge folk for it. The universities themselves seemed really quickly to respond to that, and like the universities directly provided accommodation really quickly, one after the other. They started saying, no, we'll end up. You won't have to pay, April to June or whatever segment it is. But we were left with the same story as always, with the private accommodation providers trying to squeeze every last penny out of students that they possibly could. So that was one that we actually tried to fix in Parliament, but the amendment didn't pass. I lodged an amendment to the emergency legislation that was being put through on this that would give students the same right to terminate their lease as everyone else, because student accommodation is treated completely differently to any other private rental accommodation. So any other tenant, you get a 28-day notice period. You have a right to leave your tenancy with 28 days. You don't have that right with student accommodation. So we tried to just put an amendment in to say that should be treated like everything else. And the government suggested that it might breach the human rights of landlords. So they opposed it, and the Tories obviously opposed it, so it failed. There's another emergency bill, and we might get it through on that, but it was like the wildest conversation I've ever had with a government minister about the human rights of landlords to gouge that extra little bit of money out of folks. It was really frustrating. But the financial support point that you mentioned is an interesting one, because that's one that the government are trying to tell us loads of information about it at the moment, about everything else they're offering. So like they've topped up the SAS hardship fund. There's like an extra £2.2 million into that fund. Are you guys finding that students can actually access that as quick as they need to? Is that working?
For us, it seems to have been okay. There was quite a big kind of lag and a bit of a delay on sort of universities trying to work out how they were going to implement it, how they would get the money, how that was all going to work. But for us, we just had an update yesterday, and it does seem to be working actually quicker than usual when it comes to hardship funding. So that's been quite positive. But I think as well, it's been from our student services kind of reevaluating where their staff resources and putting a lot more of that into the money advice and into hardship. And we're also quite fortunate to have an accommodation enhancement fund specifically, which means that students can apply to that as well for specific issues to do with accommodation. So that's been really helpful to be able to have that as an additional stream. But it seems okay, some teething issues, but okay from our end.
Dan, you had a really specific issue with the financial situation of students who are also employed by the uni at a cafe. Do you want to tell everyone what's going on with that?
Yeah, so a few weeks ago, the students had got in touch because they work part-time. Some of them are full-time as well, while studying in the cafes in the university, and they were told that they couldn't get furlough because the UK government job retention scheme wouldn't allow the university to do it because they're publicly funded. The students obviously were upset. It's probably the nicest way I could put it. With the situation, they were getting left with absolutely nothing apart from the wages for the 2 weeks that they'd already worked before the university closed. So they'd gone to a lot of efforts to try and find out information, but it seemed, the further we're getting into it, seemed from the Scottish Funding Council and from information we're getting from the Scottish Government that actually university could, and that they chose to do it. They chose to not put the workers through furlough. It's the campaign's still ongoing. I don't particularly have an update on it, but it's been passed on to Unite the Union, who've been leading the charge with the workers, and they seem positive. So hopefully there's some improvement there, but it's far from fixed.
Yes, that was one. The Paisley campus for UWS is in my region, west of Scotland. So it was one that I wrote to the principal of the uni as soon as I heard about it, and I could have got a standardised response that had been sent to all the MSPs and MPs who'd got in touch, and it claimed exactly that they didn't think they could furlough their staff. But I was saying to Dan earlier on that I got that at almost exactly the same time as I got a notification from St Andrews University saying that they had furloughed hundreds of staff. So UWS's line on this it didn't seem to add up, and hopefully the union can get it sorted out. But I know that Unite's Better Than Zero campaign has been absolutely amazing. They're a brilliant example of why everyone, especially young people, especially folk who are on 0 hours contracts, should be joining a union. Like, they've hundreds, thousands of workers across the country that they've been able to actually sort this kind of thing out for. Fingers crossed they'll be able to do it for UWS as well. The other big point that... Sorry, Dan, you were trying to come in.
Actually, it's funny that we're doing this today and it's International Workers' Day, but Brian from Unite Hospitality is phenomenal, and it was getting to the point that I was a bit worried that we were overstepping our bounds. There's certain restrictions we have as a students' union on what we can do, and we can support students, but in their kind of employment capacity we can't. And 100%, today is the day to join a union, so go out and do it.
Absolutely. One of the other things that I've certainly started having students get in touch with me, and because of the kind of really weird shape of the region that I represent, I've got students who go to places like UWS, who go to all the universities in Glasgow, Stirling University students who stay here and commute. So dealing with loads of different unis' approaches to issues like coursework and exams. And that's been really interesting. Amy, you mentioned at the start, Stirling pretty quickly announced that they were cancelling first and second year exams. That was the point I started getting loads of third and fourth year students at Stirling get in touch with me, because they were concerned that it didn't look like there'd be any change to theirs apart from the exam would be online. And I had students who, they've got children who are at home with them all the time now, or they don't have a good internet connection, who were starting to say, look, I don't know what to do. I'm beginning to panic about this. But I think there's been a bit of progress on that since. Have you been involved with that? Do you know how they've been getting on at making sure that third and fourth year students aren't losing out with this?
Yeah, so my experience was pretty much the same. Started off with a bit of a flurry of first and second years that were quite worried, obviously. And then as soon as that announcement came out, third, fourth years, postgraduate students were all like, hold on a minute, this isn't really fair. So immediately was pretty much the next day on the phone to our deputy principal, asking him what can we do for third and fourth years. I think a lot of other universities, particularly Edinburgh, was really quick to release their no detriment policy, and it looked like something that we could hopefully be able to do. A lot of other universities down south were picking it up as well. So I brought that to the deputy principal and was like, what do you think about this? Could we do something similar here? And it took quite a bit of a back and forth, quite a bit of compromise, which, kind of to be expected. And obviously there's certain courses that we wouldn't be able to do that for. And particularly we have partnership degree programs with Forth Valley College. And that was quite a difficult balance because you've got all different sets of qualifications. You've got SQA ones and you've got university ones kind of all in a mix there. So that was quite a challenging one to sort through. But yeah, we've managed to have for postgraduate taught students and for third and fourth year students who aren't on accredited programs, that they can have kind of no detriment approach when it comes to working out their exam grades at the end of the year. So that's all going to be done at exam boards. Not quite the same as how other universities have done it. A lot have decided to kind of do a blanket version of like your grade can't get any lower, which ours doesn't necessarily say. So there could be a lot more working through to come up there once the exam boards have met. But it's definitely something to kind of keep an eye on there. And a little bit of a different approach to some other universities, but we do have it out there as a policy. So that's a good start at least.
What about UWS, Dan? Are they taking a no detriment policy as well?
We've asked for it. It doesn't look like it's going to happen, to be honest. There has been the changes to the first and second year exams, which won't go ahead. Some of them being replaced with coursework, depending on accreditation and the kind of quality framework that they need to meet. But there's no detriment policy currently. I very much doubt it will happen. Basically, the line that we've got is that the university doesn't want degrees this year to be counted as less than from previous years, which I can understand the thinking behind it, but we still want people to be able to progress and for people to graduate this year. And for a university that has such a high level of students who are parents, such a high level of students from SMID 20 and 40 backgrounds, it's disappointing that we're not the ones leading it. As Amy said, Edinburgh did it. For us, it was Glasgow had done it. And if Glasgow could do it, why can't we do it? There is complicated reasons why the university isn't doing it. But I would still really like to see that happening. There has been slight changes that are really complicated, so I'm not going to go into it because it's different for almost every course. So it is slightly easier for there's a less reliance, let's say, on the later modules in the year, but it's certainly not a no detriment.
Yeah, what I found quite helpful actually when it came to no detriment was after the QAA had released their guidance about standards and quality, because that was something that obviously Stirling University was really aware of, especially since we have our big review coming up next year as well. We were looking really closely at the standards that the QAA were going to release. So as soon as they had kind of said that universities can, as long as they're upholding standards, then the kind of no detriment approach wouldn't be so bad, then I was able to sort of make a lot more progress with the university. But yeah, it's a real shame to hear that it hasn't been taken up more broadly by universities, because obviously students really need that reassurance, and especially for final year students and third year students, it's even more critical for them that they get the grades they need this year. So.
Yeah, that QAA paper was really good. For anyone who's not aware, so the QAA are the body for university for higher education level qualifications. So I was reading their paper on no detriment this morning because immediately after that I was speaking to the SQA, who are responsible for your school and a lot of college level qualifications, whose approach is definitely nothing like no detriment, but there's some questions on that we'll come to later. We had quite a lot of questions have actually come in, so we'll just fire straight into them. And the first few were all about funding, a lot of stuff that you'd expect and stuff that Dan and Amy have both been dealing with on their campuses. So there's one from Jen that came in asking what financial support and options are available for students over the summer, pointing out that usual employment opportunities obviously aren't going to be there, and SAS money is going to stop at the end of term. Dan mentioned that for UWS and Abertay that finishes earlier than for others. What kind of advice are you both giving to students at the moment about finances over the summer? Because even when the pandemic isn't on any normal year, the highest level of student dropout rates is over the summer. That's when the financial pressures are really at their maximum. So what are you talking to students about at the moment to help them get through?
I think it's really difficult, to be honest. There's like you said, summer is almost impossible on a normal year. Never mind when we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Trying to get I live near the centre of Glasgow, and for me to try and get full-time bar or general hospitality or retail work is near impossible. I think I've managed it once. You know what I mean? And now the jobs that people would normally float into in the summer, there's no chance of getting them. I honestly do not know what advice I could give anyone other than write to your MSPs and tell them that we need funding through the summer and we need a universal basic income to happen now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Dan said, it's hard enough throughout the summer. A lot of students, it does encourage them to take on 0 hours work and work that isn't particularly good at all for them. So yeah, to have that thrown in the middle of it is just, I'm just at a loss of what to say to them at this point, because it's completely ridiculous. A lot of them who work as well through term, they've managed to take advantage of things like the furlough scheme, but yeah, for other students that are just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Some students, quite a lot actually that I've heard from, are going to defer for a year or try and kind of do something else for a little bit longer before coming to university, because that kind of the system that is at the minute just isn't working for them.
I think also workers that are working on 0 hour contracts that have been put into furlough, like, great, they have that kind of safety net for now. But what we need to realise is that people working maybe 15, 20 hours a week who rely on their student loan, when their student loan finishes, they're still down 20% of what they would normally make from their working, never mind what they would get in their loan. And if this extends through the summer and people are getting maybe a couple of £100 a month, that wouldn't even pay for a flat in Glasgow, never mind anything else.
Exactly, like 20% doesn't seem that much, but it literally can be the difference between being above the breadline or not.
Yeah, I mean, if you're already getting paid below the living wage, which so many people who are working, bars, cafes and stuff already are, taking 20% off that just makes it completely impossible, because you're taking folk right down to the minimum wage. It's something that we've kind of struggled with trying to pitch proposals to the Scottish Government over, because we're really aware that students need financial support really quickly. But depending on how we do it, like if you increase and extend SAS payments over the summer, like particularly that we were looking at how we would support final year students, folk who should be graduating now, and maybe trying to get extended SAS support for them. Depending on how you do that, they then can't get access to universal credit. And getting access to universal credit is hard enough in the first place, because it's a system that's designed by cruel people to stop you from getting any support. You've got a 5-week waiting time on that. There's supposed to be an opportunity to get money up front, but we know that doesn't work, because, again, universal credit isn't designed to help people. So we're struggling with how do we in Scotland design a support system for students that doesn't accidentally make things worse, because it's coming up against a UK welfare system that is designed to make things worse.
I think it's really difficult, but I'm not going to apologise for being an advocate of the citizens' income, but that is really the only way to do it fairly and do it accurately across the country. Obviously, students that are graduating this year would then be eligible to apply for universal credit, but mid-degree students they're not eligible because they're students. Also, there's certain parts in that for parents and other categories that people can apply for it, but generally bog standard student is not eligible to apply for it because they're a student. So we need to do something that actually just immediately allows you, not means tested, send money into people's banks so they can buy food. And to be honest, a universal basic income that comes in naturally, I think is probably the best way to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's something that we've been pushing on. It's one of those things where, obviously, on one level, it's a massive undertaking, but as a system, it's so much simpler than anything else in the welfare system, because it is just an unconditional payment to everyone. And we see other countries like Spain are trying to move towards bringing it in as quickly as possible now. Their government were looking at doing it anyway, but now they see it's really urgent. They're looking at bringing it in not just to respond to the crisis, but once they've introduced it, to make it permanent, because they see the massive long-term benefits that it'll have. And it has exactly those kind of benefits, particularly for not just students and young people, but for folk who are coming back to education later on. Like Dan, you were saying, a lot of the kind of folk who go to unis like UWS, who don't come from backgrounds that are typically associated with uni. They come from a background where it's typically quite hard for them to go to uni, especially if they're going back into education later in life. Those are exactly the kind of people that would really benefit from something like having that security of a basic income. They can make the choice to actually go back and get the education that they want. The only thing that's otherwise been holding them back is they just don't have the money to do it. But for folk like us, we believe education's a right. You shouldn't have financial barriers to it. We had a couple of other really interesting questions. There was one that is a kind of provocative one, saying basically how so many small businesses in the country are struggling to operate. Shouldn't we be increasing financial support to them over financial support to students? The easiest answer to that is it's not a one or the other situation, but students are people, and we're talking about supporting people so that they can keep a roof over their head, so they can feed themselves and their children, etc. Is that something that you encounter as student officers? Because we get stuff like that all the time in Parliament, where anytime you try and support any particular group in society, someone else feels that they're losing out as a result. And their instinct isn't to say, right, there should be a race to the top and we should increase everyone's support. There's always that couple of people that think, no, if you take that support away from them, you can give it to people like me instead. Do you ever get that kind of negative feedback from folk who are not students about, why do your students get this kind of support when I don't?
Partly, but I think what's been really interesting actually from COVID is to see how much people think, oh, young people don't seem to care about COVID, they'll just go back to their normal lives, it's not going to have as much of an impact on them. All those kinds of comments that I've had over the past few weeks, people go, oh, but you're all young, you'll be all right. Young people don't seem that bothered by it. And then on the other hand, you've got all these students so concerned for all different reasons. And yeah, I don't think it's fair to just kind of have a blanket approach. And I think that's something that the pandemic has really brought out, actually, a kind of feeling that, yeah, young people will be all right. And no.
I think it's difficult almost because it would make sense in why putting more money into businesses would then create more jobs for students, but we know that doesn't happen. We know putting more money into business puts more money into business, and that tends to be where that money stops. And especially when we're talking about kind of small local businesses that aren't massive profit makers, that money is going to be going to pay the staff that they already have, that they've probably had to furlough. Or making adjustments to the workplace so that people can go in social distance. I would very much struggle to see how they would take students in who don't have necessarily the practical experience in those sectors. And yeah, anytime someone suggests giving money to employers so that they'll employ young people, I just cannot trust it, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, that's the response that we've been given to. It's not a huge number of people, but you always get that same small group who come back with stuff like this, is saying, we're really not in the business of dividing people right now. Practically everyone in society needs some kind of support right now. The only people who don't need it are, and shouldn't get it, is your billionaires, your tax avoiding corporations, your folk who are begging for bailouts literally from their private islands in the case of Richard Branson. Like, screw giving them any money. But I'm not going to, as an MSP who represents thousands of students and thousands of small businesses, going to say, no, only one of these two groups deserves support. Clearly they both do, because everyone needs support during a crisis, apart from the billionaires. Screw them. We had one question from Peter, was asking about support for PhD students, but the short answer to that is that varies so much depending on what university you go to. So if you're not sure stuff like that, feel free to drop me an email or get in touch with your local MSPs who can help you and find that out for you. But PhD student support just varies massively across the country. There is a good question there about making sure there's consistency for something like that. Moving on to questions we got about accommodation. We touched on this one earlier on. Question in from Dave, who's saying, what more can we do to push the NUS campaign, the Not Staying, Not Paying campaign, which was about students who've left student accommodation because they have to, not out of choice, because they have to. The university's closed, they need to go home, particularly a lot of international students, but who are still being forced to pay for it. And we mentioned that the universities themselves and all their directly provided accommodation, that has been resolved, that I'm aware of, but you've still got a lot of private providers who are trying to squeeze as much out of people as they can. I don't know, are either of you aware of any private providers that are associated with your universities who are still trying to do that?
Yeah, 100%. Like we started a campaign in Glasgow. We work quite closely with the university, college, and kind of specialist institutions, student unions, and we launched our campaign roughly the same time as NUS launched it Scotland-wide, and we got a couple of quick wins. But Fresh Student Living, who have MyPads in Paisley next to Gilmore Street, have done absolutely nothing. We've asked them a few times, and they are not keen to do it. So yeah, it's been a bit difficult from that. Liberty Living, United Students, we got the wins on them straight away. Strathclyde were right in at the start, getting Strathclyde Student Union were right in at the start trying to fight with them, and they said, what, fair dues. That's probably the right thing to do. But our university's not quite fixed it yet either. There's still a month's notice that people had to give, even if they'd already left, which we don't see as particularly fair. But after trying to fight that one, it's half the way to what it should be. But yeah.
From our perspective, like having private providers is fairly new in Stirling, so there aren't that many, but there is one called Central House, which is partially privately owned and partially owned by the university, which has been a really difficult one to untangle, because obviously it's quite a unique situation. So we've obviously been working with the university to try and see what they can do, but coming up against this wall with a private provider. So yeah, that's kind of an ongoing situation. Our main focus at the moment, actually, because we've kind of dealt with a lot of the other bigger issues, and now we're trying to look at Central House. So yeah, it's definitely far from over, and it's really tough because there are so many more private providers coming into university towns and cities trying to take up all the space, and yeah, it's getting to a real crunch point, I think.
Yeah, I think the real frustration for us has been because MSPs from across every party, I say every party, I don't know whether Tories were encouraging them to do this, but I know MSPs from every other party were getting in touch with these private providers and saying, no, you need to get a grip, you need to change the policy. But the really frustrating bit, the bit that was like insulting, was some of these are like the same companies that are accessing business support. Like they are getting free money from the government to help them while still collecting money from students that they don't need to. They're getting the business support, they can furlough their staff, but they're still trying to squeeze as much money out of students as possible when those students really can't afford it. So the question that was asked, that Dave asked, was about supporting the NUS campaign on this. So I'd mentioned earlier on, I put the amendment into the original emergency bill. We could have fixed it there and then. This could have been done weeks ago, but the government and the Conservatives voted it down. The government made some noises that they might bring it back with the next emergency bill. So that'll be in, I think, about 2 weeks' time. If they don't, then I'll obviously try and amend it again. But there will need to be a lot of lobbying around it. So I'm interested in what the two of you think about how easy it is to get students campaigning at the moment, because we can't do any of the normal stuff of like, you're not out on campus collecting signatures for a petition. We can't do rallies outside the Parliament or on campuses or whatever it might be. So how have you found mobilising students? Is that easy at the moment to get folk to take actions like social media actions online, or is it actually really hard to get folk mobilised around a campaign right now?
I think it depends on what it is and whether it's kind of sold to the students right in the first place. Like we've had a lot of support for the student workers that are campaigning UWS, and their campaign's been really loud. I don't think it's necessarily, obviously I prefer doing things on the ground, and I would rather have a protest outside of somewhere, but doing online stuff, EIS have been doing a lot with Shetland College and with Forth Valley College, where they've had online rallies. I think those are models we can certainly follow. I don't see it quieting down people's activism because they're inside. If anything, people are seeing more online and they're getting angrier.
Yeah, I think so as well. From Stirling, like, people are still obviously engaging with it. There's been a lot posted on social media as well, but I think I worry that it's slightly easier to ignore on social media and slightly less impactful. So I'm definitely keen to get activism happening again outside of our computers. But yeah, for now it has been good. But yeah, and I think as well, maybe it's easier for newer people to get engaged with. It's a lot less scary to just post something on your Facebook page than it's to like go and meet a whole new group of people or go and join in a protest. So in that way, it's probably brought more people into it. But
yeah, one thing that's really good, like from my perspective as someone who gets lobbied a lot, the standardized emails that folk can send are great, and we see that a lot of them have come in, but a standardized email gets a standardized response, so you don't look at everyone individually because they're all the same. So now that some folk, not everyone, but some folk have more time because they're in lockdown, like sending individual written emails to your MSPs, because everyone's got 8 MSPs and 1 MP, or local councillors, depending on what it is, but sending like an individual email that you have written, not a different one to every MSP. Like there's 8 of us, you can send us all the same email. But if your email is even slightly different to somebody else's, our response is going to have to be different, which means MSPs will actually read more of them. Because if you get 350 of the same email, you're not going to read them all, and it would be wrong to read them all because it's just time that you could be spending on like doing some casework for someone else instead. So that's one thing I'd really encourage students to be doing right now is send individual emails and chase folk up. If you're not getting a response from your MSP or MP, like chase them up for it, because they will notice that. Everyone is working through their email inbox right now. That is the primary way to contact them. So it's like definitely worth doing. We had a couple of questions about qualifications. So we had one about from Dylan about the SQA's qualifications this year. So that's primarily about like schools and colleges. That was something that I was dealing with this morning. We had the chief exec of the SQA in front of the education committee, and frankly, it was like really disappointing. Like I'm really anxious now about the system that they've designed, and the knock-on effect it's going to have for unis and colleges, and how students can actually get the qualifications they need to get into them. Like, to cut a really long story short, teachers have to estimate all their pupils' grades this year, or college lecturers. But what the SQA then does to quote unquote moderate that is they look at how that pupil's performed in the past. Fair enough. But they're also looking at how the schools performed in the past. So schools who traditionally have lower exam pass rates, usually schools in more deprived areas, are basically stand a far higher chance of having their pupils' grades lowered from what the teacher said they should be, because the SQA is trying to average it all out, and they're asking them to rank all their students within these tiny little bands. So our concern is that immediately that's really unfair, particularly to young people from working class backgrounds, basically. But it's also going to have a big impact on how school students and college students can get to the next level of their education. And I know it's really early days yet, but have either of you had any discussions with your universities? Are you aware of the uni starting to have discussions about next year's cohort and what admissions look like, and making sure that young people actually get a fair chance at applying for the course in the university that they want to go to?
I mean, we haven't had a great deal of conversation at the moment, to be honest. Most of what we've looked at for our next cohort is when the semester will start, how it's going to work, will it be online, all of those kinds of questions, kind of planning that out depending on how long lockdown goes on for. But I think we are definitely really aware from the kind of student support aspect that there's going to be a lot of students coming into university who had a really challenging exit from high school and now are going to have some kind of very different experience of coming to university, and that being such a kind of formative experience in itself is going to have a huge impact. So that's kind of the conversation at the moment, but definitely we'll need to look at what kind of impact that's going to have on grades as well and on admissions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, UWS is a different kettle of fish. Again, a lot of our students come in as direct entries from colleges, or they come in as mature students that haven't necessarily been in education for a while. So it's probably less impactful for us. And I know from the kind of groups that people join that we've had a lot of admissions recently. Since this lockdown's happened, it's my phone doesn't stop ringing with them. But no, that's certainly something that would be quite interesting to find more out about. But like Amy said, the kind of preparing for the difficulties that students are going to have, having had difficult exits from previous education, is certainly something that needs to be looked at for the next year.
Yeah, I think that like the wider impact on a young person's experience of education is something that we're only beginning to kind of figure that out. Because I know I run a youth group in my church, and I've been trying to catch up with the young people from it. And some of them, you get this impression, they feel fairly like they've kind of been robbed of what should have been a really good final experience of school, all the fun stuff that you would do at the end of if you're in sixth year at high school or something like that. But also just that straightforward opportunity to take an exam and feel fairly judged based on what they thought they were preparing for all year. And that sense of loss is one that we're going to have to start figuring out over the summer, because as you say, they're going to start uni in a completely different way from any students started it before. But they're going to start it with this experience that they're going through right now, where they do kind of feel robbed and cheated, and not unreasonably, like everyone else is being in some way as well. But what should have been a really great experience for them just hasn't happened at all. We had cases of schools that were closing on a day and a half's notice was what was given, and that was right. That was the public health advice. But you had staff like throwing Weavers hoodies at pupils that they thought they weren't going to be giving them for a couple of months. Even really simple stuff that my young people are telling me about they've not got their yearbook. They don't know where they'll ever get a yearbook, and just all these little experiences that they're now going to lose out on, which raises a wider point about student well-being and counselling and things. And I'd be interested in what that experience has been like for you. Do you think that students in your campuses who are going through something particularly challenging right now, is it easier for them to be able to access whether they want to speak to a counsellor or whoever else it might be to get that extra bit of support?
I mean, for us, we've put a lot more into our student support services at the moment. We've got things like the Big White Wall and other support services that we didn't have, but it's really hard to get people to engage with them a lot more. Rather than people just walking into our student services hub and saying like, oh, can I talk to someone? It's much harder to reach people and to get that connection. So even before lockdown, I mean, we had made some changes to our counselling service and reduced the waiting time a lot, but we still had quite a few weeks of a wait, and now there isn't a wait at all, which sounds great, but it does worry us as well that people just aren't reaching out, and that they aren't getting that support that they need. So there's some good news, but also concerns as well. I think it really is so much harder to connect with people during this. So yeah, I don't know about Dan.
Yeah, I think it's a really strange one, because you would naturally expect that this would have caused a lot, like a kind of increased use of any support services and any counselling, but it doesn't seem to have. And I think part of it is that there isn't that walk-in aspect. Like, does someone want to do counselling through Zoom? Like, probably not. That's an awkward situation. Are they in a house with someone and they're going to hear that session? You know what I mean? I think there's so many factors that we didn't initially realise that are causing. I think there's probably a lot more people out there who need the help possibly than there was before, but they're not in a position to be able to access it, and there's not really much that many people or many institutions would be able to do to help that. I think our access to our kind of services within the union itself is decreased as well, normally at a time where it would have been peaking. It is certainly strange, and it's not what any of us expected or prepared for.
Yeah, definitely. Like, there are so many more barriers at the moment as well, and I think it kind of comes back to what you said at the start about your casework. Like, a lot of the time I'll be talking to a student and, we'll start a conversation talking about their exams or one of their assessments, and they'll end up kind of saying they're not feeling great or whatever other kind of issues are going on in their life, and that's the point where you would kind of signpost them on. And as well, for our academic staff, they deal face-to-face with students so much that they often can tell if someone isn't feeling themselves or if they haven't been to class in a while. But when all of that's happening online, it's much harder to spot. So there's that aspect to it as well.
Yeah, that point about not being able to, for lecturers, and this applies for college lecturers and school teachers as well, not being able to physically see or even see via video conference how their students are getting on, is starting to become quite a big concern, because for a lot of folk, for a whole variety of reasons, and this applies right from children in primary school to folk who are at university, there's a whole variety of reasons that you either don't want to or can't connect from home. You maybe don't want to show your lecturer or other students what your home situation is like for a whole variety of reasons. And it becomes much harder for folk who are providing just that immediate oversight role and get that sense that the first person to raise a concern or to be aware that something might be wrong is usually a teacher or a lecturer. They don't have the opportunity to do that. We're hearing cases of classes of 30 folk that are being invited into Zoom calls, but only 4 or 5 of them are actually dialing in. And that is, you hear those stories from primary, secondary, college and uni. And it's for a whole bunch of reasons. Some folk just can't because of connection issues and things, but there's other folk who they don't want other people to see what their home life is like, unfortunately. And that just makes it so much harder to reach out to them and to connect, which is why it's about making folk aware of helpline numbers they can call, but also, because of exactly what you said, they might not want other people to overhear a phone call, to have like text message and WhatsApp-based counselling systems as well. We just need to exhaust every way of reaching out to people at the moment, because it's hard right now, but it's going to get harder the longer the lockdown goes on. And it's really worrying when you've increased capacity for a counselling service, but there aren't folk using it, because it's not because demand's disappearing. There's no way demand is disappearing during a crisis. We had a couple of interesting questions that come in, kind of related to the point about calling in, speaking to a lecturer. James saying that he was interested in doing more qualifications and through distance learning. He's saying that universities should offer more of this. I'm presuming that, given what's just happened, universities and colleges and schools across the country have found all sorts of ways to offer distance learning that they didn't think they could do before. But I'm interested in what your experience has been. Are your universities doing a lot more online and a lot more distance learning stuff that previously they said that they couldn't or they wouldn't do?
I think, yeah, we have been moving to do more in kind of recent years, but I think what we need to remember sometimes is that it takes a certain kind of person to do online teaching. It takes a certain kind of person to teach in front of a class, and not necessarily the same person. I think there's a lot of lecturers that I've spoken to that are absolutely detesting this because they enjoy the kind of human-to-human interaction, and they really can't, you know what I mean? It's that we do things by body language, and that's how we communicate more than actually speech. And I think that's where a lot of them are struggling with it. I think when you look at places like the Open University, they're the experts in distance learning, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. You know what I mean? Like UWS, for example, is the expert in teaching people from like underprivileged backgrounds and for teaching people with disabilities, because that's what we have extraordinarily high numbers of, and that's what we always have, and that's, you know what I mean, that's what we're good at. Everyone has their own different thing, and why you would go to that uni for certain things. I think adding more distance learning adds different difficulties, and you then expect more from lecturers who, to be perfectly honest, are so far stretched at the moment without having to go into this kind of pandemic. Like, we've probably all forgotten about it, but there were strikes in nearly every university a couple of months ago because the lecturers aren't getting treated right. And I think then forcing them to go on and doing online learning and kind of distance learning when it's after this pandemic is a bad ask. I think there might be an uptake in distance learning when people or students realise that they can do it. Maybe they thought that they weren't going to manage it, and now they've realised, you know what, living in the house for a month is absolutely fine, I can do that. But yeah, I think asking individual universities to increase their distance learning opens a can of worms that maybe we don't want to be open.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, yeah, there's an aspect of, okay, we can finish the semester online or we can start the next semester online, but being able to then transform things to be a whole degree program being delivered online or something else, it can, yeah, it's definitely a different kettle of fish. And yeah, it would be great to see universities kind of making themselves a little bit more accessible in that way, and using that online space. And I think that probably the tools that universities will be investing in over the next few months will help us to do that. But yeah, I was kind of laughing at, after Dan had said about what his university does really well, because everyone knows people come to Stirling for sport, and we can't do any of that at the moment. So we've got that as well. But anyway, that was...
How much of that can you do online, Amy?
Absolutely zero. Not so much of the team sports going on at the minute. So.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of emphasis on golf-based sport courses, because it's like the one thing you can do easily with social distancing. Yeah. Not very green though. Dan brought up a good point there about the strike action that took place. So that was one the Greens wrote to every principal in Scotland, every uni principal, saying that the pay that they were planning on deducting from their staff who took part in the strike action should be cancelled, given how staff are going above and beyond at the moment to do as much as they can to support students. Some universities got back to say either, yeah, that's what we're planning on doing, we think our staff are doing a great job. Some have got back to say that they're spreading it out. They were going to deduct it over 1 month or 3, and now it's 6. And some have just not got back to us at all. So I think that's one thing worth saying to any student who's watching. Get in touch with your uni and ask them what they're doing, because your lecturers will appreciate it. Like, this is the worst possible time to be deducting pay from them, especially given that it's being deducted because they were fighting for their terms and conditions, which are your learning conditions as well. We've got a couple of last questions just before we finish up in a couple of minutes. One of them is about basically the income that universities get from international students and how that funds a lot of really world-class research. Like Scottish unis do more world-class research per head of population than pretty much anywhere else. I know this is a huge issue for places like Glasgow and Edinburgh and St Andrews that get massive amounts of money from international students paying large fees to come in. It's a fair bit less for Stirling. I know it's a lot less for UWS, but you're still both universities that have international students. Has there been any discussion about what that might actually look like from next year? Because I know university management are speaking pretty intensely with both Scottish and UK governments at the moment, basically saying that they are going to need, some universities are going to need huge bailouts to literally stop them from going bankrupt. But I don't know how much of that's filtered through into discussions within universities and with yourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, from our perspective, our university are terrified because 20% of our student population is international, and we have a whole bunch of other things around our university that rely on international students as well. So yeah, it's a huge concern for us. And I think it is kind of an issue that affects the whole sector, because I think, what was it, last year or maybe the year before was one of the first years that the income that Scottish universities have had from tuition outweighs their block grant from the Scottish government. So there's so much reliance on international students right now that, yeah, it's definitely a huge issue. And when you were talking about admissions, that was a thing that's in my mind as well, because I know that some universities have kind of relaxed the English language testing and the standards around English language to try and recruit international students. So yeah, it's definitely something that's at the forefront of my university's mind.
Yeah, I think we're much the same. People would think that we didn't have a massive international student population, but we have a whole campus in London, which is very heavily run for international students to come do business courses. And yeah, we do get a lot of income from it as well. And yeah, they're definitely worrying about it. But I think what we need to kind of think about is, our universities supposed to be there to make cash, or is the Vice Chancellor there to be a business manager for a charity? Is that the model we want in kind of educational institutes, or should this just be funded by the Scottish government? Like, to be perfectly honest, I think having international students come in, having the same fee deal as we have in Scotland, and letting people live here, you know what I mean? At the moment, you get a really short time to stay after your degree, in the post-work study visa, or the post-study work visa. And, you know what I mean? It's almost as if we've just designed this whole system to get international students to come hold up the universities for the Scottish and EU students to come in, and then the second they graduate, either you find a job that pays 35 grand or sling your hook, back home you go. And it's just ridiculous. I think it's the kind of unspoken racist system that we have in Scotland.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that folk like us have been warning about for a long time, that universities are becoming massively reliant on this external income, which is a combination of like the ideological approach of like the marketization of education, treating education like a business, like you're saying, but also just straightforward underfunding from government at both levels. And there's going to be a double whammy now, because there's also the Brexit has not gone away, and there's the looming issue of the loss of the massive amount of research money that UK and particularly Scottish unis get from Brexit. But the impact of the virus, I mean, Brexit's going to be bad enough. Some universities, I think Glasgow's probably a pretty good example, and Edinburgh to some extent, do a huge amount to attract in students from places like China, Korea, etc. If you're coming from a country like that has managed to successfully contain and deal with this pandemic before us, you're not going to be applying to go to uni in a country that you can see already is dealing with it far worse. You're not going to want to travel across the world to put yourself more at risk from something that your country has already effectively dealt with and managed to manage and eliminate. So I think it's going to be a huge debate over the summer, because it's we're not talking about small amounts of money here that some universities are going to need to stop them from going bankrupt. It's massive sums of money. And as far as we're concerned, that debate shouldn't be happening as a kind of short-term crisis stopgap measure. We need to talk about this issue of how education's been marketized and how a lot of people warned for a long time that if something not quite like this, we didn't expect it to be this bad, but if something happened, we had, the financial structure of our whole higher education system is built on sand, and we're going to find out the hard way. We've just got a couple of questions left. There's one that came in from Sasha Bryden, said, why aren't colleges represented on this panel, just universities? The short answer is this is the first one of these that we've done, and Dan and Amy are my friends, and I knew that they would be up for doing this. So we're doing plenty more of these panels, and if you watch the education committee that I was on this morning, we were asking the SQA about questions to do with colleges as well. But this panel, it's just a case of folk that we knew would be up for it and folk that we knew would be good at answering these questions. It's now 1:03 though. So what I'm going to do is just finish off by asking you if there's anything else you want to add, feel free to chip it in. But otherwise, what else are you up to this afternoon, and how are you using your hour of government permitted daily exercise outside?
Well, now that the sun has come back out, and I'm very pleased about, I'm going to go for a walk around Kings Park in Stirling, and I'm going to call my mum while I do so. Very wholesome.
I don't know what I'm going to do now. I've still got a few things to wrap up for the week, and then I might go and do my couched 5K in Bellhiston Park. But at this time of night, it's so busy that I might wait till later. Dan,
we know you're going to go and play D&D.
Yeah. I might go for a walk later on, but what I'm doing next is I've got a meeting with my youth group, and we're talking about this, the church youth group. So we're talking about a couple of Old Testament stories through the medium of The Simpsons. Because if you want particularly kids to understand a whole load of Old Testament stories, The Simpsons have actually done them better than pretty much anyone else. Certainly better than any church resource I've ever seen. So I'm away to watch The Simpsons is basically what I'm saying.
Nice.
But thank you both very much for joining us, and thanks very much to everyone who was joining in throughout the stream. If you still get any questions that we've not had a chance to answer yet, do fire them in the comments or reply to the Twitter account, whatever you're watching on, and we'll try to get them answered. Otherwise, if you want to drop me an email or drop whether it's Dan or Amy or the officers at your own Students Association an email, we are all here to support you right now, and that is 99% of what we're doing is just supporting people through the thousands of different ways that they're being challenged by the current situation. So get in touch and we will help you hopefully sort out whatever it is you need. But thanks very much for now, and we will see you later on. We're doing another one of these next Friday. I think it should be 2:00 again, looking at what Dan was talking about, looking at universal basic income with a couple of experts and the big advocates for it in the UK. And until then, we will see you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.